Hey internets, so there's a tiny little problem on the interwebs today, which is that most takes on meritocracy you see are really stupid takes. And the reason they're bad takes is because they're based on a definition of meritocracy that, when you think about it, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Which is that they define meritocracy as something that is somehow to be weighted on hard work. That as long as you work hard, regardless of your social or economic class, then you should be guaranteed to make it regardless of where you come from. And therefore, meritocracy doesn't exist, according to a lot of people, because not everybody's rewarded for their hard work, because they are born into certain various disadvantages, and therefore no matter how hard they work, they'll never make it, and they'll never have the same opportunities as someone born without those disadvantages. Therefore, meritocracy is all a big, gigantic scam. And it's pretty easy to find these takes all over the place. A basic example would be Adam Something's video about 2 years ago, but to be honest, that's just an easy way to see this bad argument. If you go through Twitter or various Discords or on Reddit even, you're going to find various pseudo-intellectuals who have pretty much the same take. Some people have it easier, therefore meritocracy no realsies. That's pretty much the gist of the take. And everybody who has this take thinks that they're some kind of genius for pointing out this obvious flaw in the idea of meritocracy. The problem, though, is that that's not actually what meritocracy is supposed to be. It is obviously impossible for people to have total equal opportunity in the basic layman sense of the word. And it's not just a simple case of coming from different economic classes that make this impossible. People start out in life with cultural differences, with regional demographic differences, with religious differences, and yes, there are also genetic differences. If you think of it as a video game, real life is a place where people don't really start out with the same stats and don't have the same spawn point. The only way to have meritocracy in this case would be to somehow equalize everything, or in other words, give people a leg up in hiring practices and university admissions based on their disadvantages. And the problem with doing that is that it actually contradicts what meritocracy actually is. See, meritocracy isn't supposed to be something that is necessarily a fair thing, but rather it is supposed to be a functional thing. For instance, a job listing from an employer that is being meritocratic is simply looking for qualifications and abilities that matter to the job, while disregarding factors that are not relevant. In other words, the idea of meritocracy is that the person who is most capable for role X should be the person assigned to doing role X if they are willing to do it. It is, in other words, a competency measure in order to ensure that society is, well, functional. Or to put it simply, meritocracy is really just about the best doing what they are best at. And yes, that's true. That may not on its face immediately sound fair, because not everybody actually gets a fair shake. But the problem here is that people aren't realizing that the opposite end of the meritocracy spectrum is just kakistocracy, which is something I went over in my recent video on the gaming industry, and how it's gone through a reduction in quality by allowing itself to be infected by Marxist ideologues. Kakistocracy is when you have the least intelligent and least capable in charge. And that is just the harsh reality of meritocracy. If you do not have the best person for a role, then logically you don't have the best person for a role. You instead have something else, something in between. Then some people might argue, well, why not just weight it just a little bit in favor of the person who's been disadvantaged, while still making sure that they at least have basic qualifications? That's at least more fair, right? Technically, yes, in the immediate heat of the moment, that is more fair. The problem, though, is it makes society worse overall, which means that in the long run, it actually makes things less fair. And here's why. Consider yourself in just a basic hypothetical scenario. Let's say you find out that you have coronary artery disease, and you need triple bypass surgery, or else you'll probably die within the next year or so from a heart attack. And here's just a basic choice between two doctors. One doctor came from an upper middle class family, and who helped pay for his medical school tuition. We'll just call him Mike. Now, Dr. Mike has done 200 of these surgeries, and he has had 0 complications. Every single patient has made a complete recovery. Now, on the other hand, you can choose Dr. Amid. And Dr. Amid came from a very poor, very disadvantaged family, and he had to work 2 jobs in order to pay his own way through medical school. Now, Dr. Amid has done about 10 of these surgeries, and has had 1 complication leading to 1 death. Anybody who tells you that they would pick Dr. Amid over Dr. Mike in this situation is lying to you. You would rather have Dr. Mike every single time. Why? Because for yourself at least, when your own life is on the line, everybody understands why it is that you want the best person for the role performing a role. It is entirely irrational to consider anything else in that moment. Dr. Amid could have worked 10 jobs. Could have worked the hardest a person has ever worked ever in the history of humanity working. It doesn't matter because it's not worth the risk. Again, yes, at first that may not seem fair. But here's the beauty of it. Ironically, shifting a society towards a meritocratic system, as opposed to a kakistocratic or entitled system, actually helps those people who are born with lower stats or have worse spawn points out more. Because competent doctors mean more lives are saved, meaning more people are able to work in society. Competent financial advisors lead to better corporate decisions. And even in Hollywood, competent writers create stories that are more engaging, and thus better at reducing stress of the population as a whole. And of course, competent leaders in general create policies which enable more wealth and freedom to be generated. In other words, when you have a society where you aim to have the most competent and capable individual performing the role that they are most capable of, this raises the overall general wealth of society, which means that over time, those people who had crappy spawn points end up having the exact same spawn points as the wealthier, more advantaged people did 50 years ago. That is what meritocracy is actually about. It is the recognition that anything that runs counter to the most competent and capable person being allowed to perform a role if they want it, means that a less competent person is now performing that role. This is one of the basic reasons why DEI initiatives don't actually make society better. While it may seem more fair on paper to consider a person's disadvantages, for whether or not they get admitted to a school or hired for some job, this fairness comes at the cost of a competency crisis. And that's what people need to understand, and that's why these various takes that whine about fairness are actually very dumb, because it's either meritocracy or kakistocracy. And the harsh reality is only one of these is sustainable, which means that if you want a better life and a better chance for the people who start with less, while it may seem a little bit counterintuitive, not considering those disadvantages is actually more helpful in the long run. It also helps societies avoid certain pitfalls where they get obsessed with equality. Pure, true equality is largely a utopian fallacy. It is impossible to equate across all lines and all cultures and all people. And this idea that meritocracy isn't a good thing, or doesn't exist, just because it's not perfect, is just another cancerous idea that is exploited by Marxist ideologues for them to come in and trick people into accepting these authoritarian policies. When you realize that it's either meritocracy or kakistocracy, it's easy to see that this is yet another big grift. Anyways, that's all I have to say for the subject. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to like, subscribe, and you can also support me on Subscribestar or Ko-Fi or by buying some merch. Till next time.